Thanks, Michael. See how we go with the microphone. I know this was sort of reverberating back a bit, but I mean, either that or I can just hold it about there. Okay. So my name is David Hiley. I'm filling in for Jamie Smith. So for those of you who came along and wanted to hear about the future of autonomous vehicles and so forth, come and have a yarn to me later, and I'll can share my knowledge and so forth about that. But today I'm just going to focus on things which are sort of near and dear to my heart, which is about EVs in practice, what it's like charging them. I have solar and storage at home, so I want to talk a lot about that. I first want to just get a show of hands. How many people currently have solar at home? So we're looking at about 2/3. Storage, about 1/4. An EV, thinking of buying an EV in the next 12 months? Not too many, but okay. All right, so I think the EVs are about 20%, I think, when the hands went up there. Okay, that's good. So a little bit similar to Michael. I've been an EV owner for quite some time. So I bought my first EV, and I'm an OEM guy, so I'm opposite to Michael. Michael's built them all from scratch. I don't have an engineering background and so forth. I've tinkered a little bit, but I've basically bought OEM vehicles, as we call them. So the first one was a Vectrix scooter. It's a large scooter, about top speed about 100-110k an hour. Unfortunately, nickel metal hydride batteries, so nothing too good range-wise. I currently have a Nissan Leaf, and I've bought and sold a whole bunch of other cars, including a Mitsubishi Outlander Phev, which I sold a few weeks ago. And I've raced a Zero SR motorcycle around the country and done lots of trips around Sydney and surrounds with some friends who are here as well today. And so I've sort of pushed kind of the limits of the range of a lot of short range vehicles and even built some fast chargers for those Zero motorcycles. This is what my home looks like. So we built our home in 2012, and therefore I could take advantage of setting it up the way that I wanted to for maximum sort of north-facing roof. So we currently have around 10 kilowatts of solar PV on there, just pretty much on the northern roof only. We haven't touched the western roof yet. I have, actually it's more than that. It's now about 44 kilowatt hours of home storage. I have 22, which I'm currently using, and I have another pack. We're on a time of use tariff. I use solar analytics for monitoring, and my friendly retailer AGL pays me about $400 a year because I'm such a nice guy. So that's basically thanks to it's pretty much zero imports and smart use of load shifting and things like that, which the EV is very, very good for, as owners of EVs would already understand. A little bit about what I do for work. So I run a business called whatever.com.au. Show of hands, anyone who's ever heard of it, used it? Oh, that's not too bad, about 7 or 8, excellent. So this has every single retail and every single electricity plant in the country on it for residential and small business. If you're interested in solar feed-in tariffs and what's changed from July 1, whatever.com.au/solarfit, and basically it's all the solar feed-in tariffs from all the retailers and all the plans. You can just really browse around and have a look at that. We also offer comparison service similar to others, but obviously whole of market, and yeah, there's some remember that link and have a look at the solar feed-in tariff and make sure you're getting good value from the solar from your roof. So today I just want to give you a bit of an EV market update, sort of what's been happening recently. We'll talk a little bit about the economics of EVs and how the ROI is looking. We'll have a look at some of the EV charging basics, so for those who aren't familiar with that, just how that actually works at home. Then we'll talk about solar off-peak and storage and how do you optimise that. And then if you are yet to add solar, or you're looking to, well, how much solar would I need to support a car? I'll give you some metrics on that as well. And then we'll touch on vehicle to home, which seems to be a very popular question. So this is a tweet. It's probably very small, hard to read from there, but Christina Boo is the equivalent of the Norwegian AIVA, head of AIVA in Norway, whatever that's called in Norwegian. So she's basically produced a chart here that's basically showing the takeoff of electric vehicles around the world. It's obviously scaling up quite quickly over the last few years. And it's moving beyond early adopters. So what we can see here, for example, Tesla Model 3 was the 4th best-selling passenger car in December 2018 in the USA. There's probably some stats from Europe as well. And if anyone's followed the news today, the guy from BMW who wasn't really getting on board with EVs has just left the building. So it's fairly clear that the European manufacturers are getting on board in a big way with EVs, and they want to get on top of this curve. So Norway, you probably heard this stat as well. So Norway provides a lot of support for their EVs. 58.8% of the sales of cars, passenger cars in March were pure electrics. Another, 11% were actually plug-in hybrids. So they basically get VAT free and a whole bunch of extra things, and they tax petrol cars highly as well. So you can basically buy an electric car cheaper in a lot of cases cheaper in Norway than you can buy a petrol equivalent. Quick update on what's happening in Australia. So there's really significant change that's happening this year for a number of reasons. So I think I was chatting to a gentleman earlier who's already picked up a Hyundai Kona. And we have the Tesla Model 3 coming out in a couple of months. So what's really changed is that the market in Australia we haven't really had a lot of choice of vehicles. So there's been Teslas, and they're a beautiful car. Unfortunately, they're $140,000 starting price, a little bit less now, I think. And that's made it quite difficult for the average person to be able to afford them, and I couldn't afford them as much as I wanted to. However, there's some good cars on the market now with medium to long range. Some of these you would have been familiar with, like the Hyundai Ioniq. Range around 200 kilometres. The Hyundai Kona is pushing around 450 kilometres. The Model 3, there's the standard range and long range. The standard range is about 300 or so, and the long range up around 450 to 500. So we're seeing price points now around the $50,000, $70,000 mark, which are getting vehicles that a lot of people would consider have little to no compromise. Obviously, if you're doing long distance trips, we're still reliant on having good charging infrastructure in place, and if you're a Tesla owner, you've already got that. If you're a Kona owner, that's coming very soon between Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Cairns. There's a few premium cars, particularly from Germany, coming through in the next 6 months or so, from Audi, Mercedes and Porsche, if you can get on the wait list for that one. So it's a very crude sort of EV economic slide, and I'm going to get this one out every year, and it's going to get better every year. So this was looking at a Hyundai Kona. I think it's the Highlander model. So what we have is the electric-only version is 65,000 K plus on roads. The equivalent car with the same spec, the petrol version with the Highlander, is 39 K plus on roads. So we're looking at about a $25,000 difference, $26,000 difference. Running through just some very simple numbers on the standard servicing and the fuel costs using the standard assumptions over here. So 20,000 kilometres a year. And EVs look good if you're doing bigger miles, of course. 20,000 kilometres a year, they're the standard figures that they have for electricity usage and for petrol usage on the petrol model. The net result of this simple calculation, which doesn't worry about more problems or breakdowns with the petrol cars, is that it's going to take about 15 years to get your money back on this if you're doing 20,000 Ks a year. It's not a great scientific analysis, but it's just an idea of are EVs getting there? And if anyone who's bought storage, when you bought it, what was the sort of number of years you expected to get your money back? Storage. 15? 20? So we have tens of thousands of people already buying storage now with payback periods that are around what you get for an EV. If you were to buy something like a Mitsubishi Outlander, which I did, and it's only about $8,000 more, you'll definitely get your money back a lot faster. So if you're driving something like a Mitsubishi Outlander, you could go through that, do similar mileage, and you get your money back within about 7 or 8 years. Just depending on obviously how you use that. Obviously if you're driving around town like we were, then we were pretty much getting about 1 litre per 100 Ks on that car because it's pretty much all electric driving. So this is an example of a car that people would be very interested in buying. It's a small compact SUV. So this number, which is 15 years payback period, that will continue to improve as prices come down. And obviously on smaller cars with shorter ranges, it can be better than that as well. So for those who've been through solar purchasing, EV economics is a little bit like solar in terms of the way that works. So solar savings, rough rule of thumb is for every kilowatt of PV you put on your roof, you save around about $200 a year, and that's a combination of reducing your actual electricity you buy from the grid and the feed-in tariffs, which is still pretty good at the moment actually. If you're not getting 15 cents or above, have a look at whatever. We could probably help you out, find something better. The net result is if you put about 5 kilowatts on your roof, you're looking at about $1,000 saving. Depends on which state you are. In South Australia, you'll save a little bit more. In Victoria, a little bit less. EV savings. So another one of my little rule of thumbs around this. So EV savings. So we've got a large EV sedan using about 20 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks, doing about 15,000 Ks a year. And you can see the petrol consumption there as well. So we're saving around about $1,350 per year on fuel. If you're driving about 15,000 Ks. Obviously, if you're doing more Ks in an EV, then the economics get better. But in terms of actual quantum of saving, that solar system gets you about $1,000 of saving. An EV buys you about $1,350. If EVs were $5,000, that would be fantastic. Unfortunately, they're $50,000, so it does take a longer to get payback. Obviously, solar payback's pretty awesome at the moment. It's about 5 years. So EVs are still a way off that, especially for the longer range ones. Moving on to EV charging, just some basics around how that works. So all EVs come with an onboard charger. So when you go and say, I'm going to go and plug the charger in, the charger's technically already in the car. What you see on public charging stations, like the one at Broadway I plugged into tonight, they're called electric vehicle supply equipment. There are a bunch of safety switches and so forth inside there. They're just providing AC to the car. So you need an external EVSE to charge, whether that be a portable one that they give you with your brand new EV that sits in the boot, or one you fit at home, or you can go out and use public charging stations. They're all EVSEs when we're talking about AC charging or slow charging. I said fixed or portable, and the EVSEs themselves actually control how fast the cars charge. So they have limits, as well as your onboard charger having a limit. So the EVSE itself can actually control the charging, which is an important thing when we get to solar. But if you have a Tesla, for example, and even if you think with the latest Hyundais, you can actually set the limit of how fast you want the car to charge. Hopefully this slide will change down to one diagram. So anyone who got their car fairly early on, like myself with a Nissan Leaf, we went with the American standard, which is a single-phase standard. It's called Type 1 or J1772. The whole charge point network, which is around the country, is pretty much only using that. However, we've moved on. We're pretty much moving across to Type 2. So if you pretty much buy any car these days, even the new Nissan Leaf that's coming out in August, will be Type 2. Tesla has been using Type 2 since it's come in. Hyundai, Kona, Ioniq are all using Type 2, the Zoe, etc., etc. So this standard here is the standard plug for Australia going forward. We still support Type 1, and you can get adapters and all those sorts of things, but that's where we're going to go. The advantage of this plug basically is it can support higher charging because it can support 3-phase. I won't talk today about DC charging. They're those superchargers we talk about, or the ultra-fast chargers that ChargeFox is putting out. I'm just going to focus on home charging or AC charging. A couple of options. You can buy a fixed station. So when you buy your electric vehicle, if you buy a Tesla Model 3 or any Tesla, they give you one of these, and you can actually get it installed by an electrician, put on the wall, and you just plug into that when you get home. Any EV will come with a portable one, which generally can be a little bit slower, but they usually do the job. They can charge around about, depending on what the portable ones are, about 15 Ks an hour, sometimes as much as 40 Ks an hour. These other ones, again, depending on the car, can charge up to 75, sometimes 100 if you've got one of the old Teslas. So these are the sort of things I was talking about in terms of the charge rates. So the faster home charging you can do here, up to 22 kilowatts. So the Renault Zoe, I think Peter I saw floating around here, has one of these, and test the fact that Renault Zoe charges at that rate. And some of the older Model S's also charge at 22 kilowatts. So they're about 100 kilometres an hour of charging. So that's how a lot of the people drove around Australia in their Model S's. They were able to stop and charge at 22 kilowatts, or 16 in the case of some of the newer cars. The 2019 Leaf, the Kona, the Ioniq, BMW i3 and the standard range Model 3 all charge at single phase, 7 kilowatts. So that'll fill up a Kona overnight. So with 7 kilowatt charging and a 64 kilowatt hour battery, you'll be done in about, 8 or 9 hours. So it's an overnight charge if you turn up completely empty, which you rarely do unless you're coming back from a long distance trip. And then there's the old stuff like my car, which just charges quite slowly. But considering it has a small pack, it'll be charged up in a few hours. If it's an Outlander or if it's my Leaf, it takes about 6 hours. And they're all maximum charge rates, and so we'll get on to solar in a moment, and because minimum charge rates, surprisingly, is quite important. So the concerns for EV owners are pretty much thus. So, you know, how much do I actually need to charge each day, and can I charge fast enough? And storage and range. While the packs go up to 100 kilowatt hours now for the Model S, most people are only driving 40 k's a day. So we had a Nissan Leaf for a couple of years. It was the only car we had. We only drove, 50, 80 k's at most each day, and it was just never a problem. And we've actually sold the Outlander. So for a lot of people, actually just having a car that has short distance, short range is fine. Obviously, your mileage will vary and what your requirements are. So in terms of home charging, what does the owners need to think about? So the first thing is utility. Can I drive wherever I want to, whenever I want to? So when you're charging a vehicle, that's the most important thing. Can I get to wherever I want to go to tomorrow or today or whenever I'm going to go out next? So that's the most important thing. Cost, because you want to take advantage of the fact that we've got something that's cheap to run. And emissions. Now this group might be a little bit different. Your emissions might be higher, it might be more important to you. But in terms of the general public, they just want the car to go wherever they want it to go. Emissions is a low priority for them. But the effect of this is that EV owners will delay the charging to use cheaper electricity. So for example, a Tesla owner could go, if you buy a Tesla Model 3, you can go to the local supercharge and you can pay 42 cents per kilowatt hour to charge up your car. Now that's pretty expensive when you've got solar at home, which arguably costs anywhere between nothing and 15 cents, or you've got off-peak electricity, if it's about 15 cents. And maybe Tesla owners aren't so worried about money, but now, always to some degree. So there are other options where people who have EVs are always looking at a cheaper way to fuel their car, if you want to think of it that way. So the three options really are to keep the cost down as low as possible, running off your own solar, off-peak if you're on a time of use tariff, and a controlled load, either one or two. If you're in New South Wales, we have two controlled loads. One's about 7 or 8 hours. There's another one called controlled load 2, which runs about 16 hours. Both relatively cheaper than your general tariff. Home solar charging. So anyone who has, just a show of hands, who has an EV and solar? Who tries to maximise the amount of solar they use for charging? One-ish, okay. And who just charges at the cheapest rate? Most people. That's good. That's what I do too. That's okay. All right. So solar EV owners want to use their own solar. However, my wife doesn't leave the car at home. She goes to work. I work from home. So the car's often not at home to charge. On a short-range EV, that can be a bit tricky. On a long-range EV, probably wouldn't matter because we could just leave the car at home on a Saturday or a Sunday because we're not out all the time, and we could charge it for long periods of time. Obviously, with a large-size PV like us, we could put a lot of charge into it. But if it's cloudy or whatever else, the available solar export for EV charging can be low or can be variable. So obviously, if you have battery storage, then you can just plug it in and charge straight off your battery storage, which by right should probably come off your solar anyway. However, smart EVSEs, which are the smart devices you can use to charge your vehicle, can actually track the solar export, and they can modify the charging rate on your car. So as the amount of solar you export increases, it intervenes and say, well, you're putting 1.6 kilowatts back into the grid, or you're putting 3 kilowatts back into the grid. Rather than putting it back into the grid, I want to charge the car. And it will adjust the charge rate in the car to basically suck up all that excess solar. Rather than putting it back into the grid, it goes into your own vehicle, and it will do that without you having to do anything. You just plug the car in and it will do that for you. How many people have heard of this particular product? 2, 3, 7, 8-ish. So Zappy is one of the products that do this. You can do that with a couple of other products as well. Zappy is probably the simplest solution. A little startup out of the UK made this product. Ingenious. I've been looking at this for about 8, 9 years. Finally, someone got around to building it. But basically the way this product works is there's 3 different modes. There is an eco mode where the car will only charge when there is sufficient excess solar available. So it won't import any electricity from the grid. So it just sits there and waits for the sun to come out, if you want to think about it that way. And then sun to come out enough. So that's the way that works. So you can effectively plug it in if you're going to be home during the day, and it will just increase and decrease the charge rate of the car until either you run out of sunlight for the end of the day or the car is full. There's another mode which is called Eco, which will charge at a minimum rate, which is 6 amps, which is about 1.5 kilowatts, which in terms of kilometres an hour is pretty slow, like 10 k's an hour, 8 k's an hour or something. But it will just trickle the thing along, and obviously if you get more solar then it will ramp up the rate from there. And there's the I just want it to charge right now because I just need to get going. Then you can override that and just put it into faster and just charge your car. There's lots of timers and all those sorts of things you can set this stuff up. So the idea with these solutions is you just set and forget. So how much solar do you need to cover your EV requirements, EV charging requirements? So on my 40 kilometres an hour, 40 kilometres per day suggestion of the average driver, EV will use about 7.5 kilowatt hours. So if you want to be able to charge your car to get 7.5 kilowatts, 7.5 kilowatt hours of electricity, you'll need to add on about 2 kilowatts of solar onto your roof. That's based on Sydney, I think, maybe a little bit further south in terms of the output. Yeah, about Sydney. So if you're further north, a little bit less, but yeah. That's just a rule of thumb to say, okay, well, if I'm going to add an EV, I'm going to be doing about 15,000 k's a year. That extra solar will help cover off the use of the car. So what does that mean? A 5 kilowatt system is kind of a bit smallish. You can probably get by, but you need the car to be around quite a bit at home to make that work. With 10 kilowatts of PV like I've got, and I guess just show of hands, how many people have got PV above 5 kilowatts? Below 5 kilowatts? Most, okay. So if you're getting an EV, you may consider having to upgrade that a little bit. Just depends on how much of that solar you're using during the day. With 10 kilowatts of P, there's more excess for charging one, or we've had 2 EVs, so being able to charge 2 at the same time is pretty neat. However, the most important point of this slide is off-peak charging is really, really important. You need to have a backup source for charging. You just can't rely on solar. So here's an example of why you can't rely on your solar to charge your EV. So this is my home, and this is basically showing this green line here is the generation. And we can see on the right-hand side here, while it looks pretty good, that is about 3 kilowatt hours per kilowatt. So in my terms, it's about 30 kilowatt hours a day over here. Over here, it's starting to get a bit low. These are rainy, cloudy days. So there's really not enough output here to be charging my EV up. So I'd need to rely on off-peak charging, control load or something else to get my charge up. So yeah, cloudy days in winter are a challenge if you want to do that. So obviously if you have a battery, that will help as well. But still, your battery can run out in winter if you have a couple of bad days in a row, a couple of cloudy days, and yeah, I shouldn't call them bad days. I mean, they're bad from the solar perspective, right? But rain's good. All right, so off-peak charging is a backup for solar. So unfortunately, this slide doesn't come out very well. So the point up one here is this. These are all bars. So all this light blue stuff, does anyone use PV output as a way of seeing what solar you generate? Wow, no one. Wow, now I feel old. Oh, one? Okay. PV output's a free tool. You can actually push all your solar information up to you, and even your consumption information. It'll track it. I think it's like $10 a year or something or other. Very good. Came out about 10 years ago. Anyway, what this is trying to show you is that in this particular time frame here, which is similar to the other, maps over to the time frame we saw before, that's all off-peak charging. In fact, I had borrowed a friend's Tesla Model X, and we put that particular day we had 60 kilowatt hours, so we pretty much charged the car back up to full 2 days in a row. So we came home with empty, charged it up to full, went out for a ride drive the next day, and again had to charge it back up to full. So if you do have a long-range EV and you're doing multiple drives like that, something like off-peak charging, you can just plug it in from 10 to 7, it's completely full and you're good to go again on the Sunday or the Monday or whatever you want to do. Definitely having an off-peak is valuable. Over here, sunny days and battery storage allows near zero grid import. So on these days here, we had my battery configured to basically soak up all that excess solar. And in this case, we just didn't import any electricity at all, or barely anything that matters. So off-peak versus solar. So if the overnight off-peak electricity makes EV charging simple, plug it when you get home. You set a timer in the car that says we'll start at 10 o'clock. It'll be finished by 11, 12, 1, depending on how empty the battery is. It's pretty straightforward. If you want to, and you live in cold climates, you can set the car to preheat if you want to, and usually it'll pull it straight out of the wall rather than out of the battery. If you've still got the charger plugged in, so if you live in Canberra or somewhere it's cold, you can pre-warm the car, which is quite nice. And you can even sit in your bedroom and go, is the car warm or not? I'll turn it up a couple of degrees today if I want to. It's super lazy when you get these apps on your phone and you just control your car. It's good for air conditioning in the beach too. When you're coming back and you're worried about the leather being boiling hot or whatever else, or the steering wheel untouchable, you can control all that stuff too, which is a pretty nice thing about EVs. So solar charging benefits, obviously lower emissions. So if you're charging straight in, then there's less emissions in doing that than pulling it out of the grid. And I guess in terms of the absolute cost, lower cost than off-peak if you're charging directly from solar. So in terms of charging from storage, it's a different sort of way of thinking of things. So some people, for example, will add storage and their goal is to minimise what they import from the grid. They don't want to have any personal emissions. That's cool. So that's one way of doing things. The other is that your solar panels are going to generate as much as they're going to generate. If it's 30 kilowatt hours a day, whether you chuck it into your battery or you throw it out in the grid, doesn't make any difference from a whole of Australia emissions. Your solar is generating 30 kilowatt hours, whether you put it in your battery, give it to someone, your neighbour to use, it doesn't actually make any difference at that level. So if you're of that mind, which I am, I guess, is my panels are generating what they're generating, then I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to buy the cheapest electricity I can because I want to add more panels and do more things with that. So at the moment, I currently pay 16 cents for my electricity and AGL kindly pays me 20 cents for what I put out. So you do the maths and go, why would I use my own solar when they're going to pay me 20 and I could buy it from them for 16? So I assume a few other people are on either AGL Solar Savers or Origin Solar Boost, for example, where if you're on a time of use tariff anywhere pretty much, well certainly around Sydney, it will be cheaper for you to buy it off the grid and then just dump all your solar in the middle of the day. And as I said, from an overall perspective, it's the solar that you have that generates the emissions reduction. So whether you use it yourself or give it to your neighbour, doesn't matter. So to minimise EV charging cost, so cheapest, most efficient way of EV charging is at home from solar. Not in my case, but usually it is. It just depends where your feed-in tariff is at. So smart technologies and consumer behaviour help. If you need a backup, grid electricity or energy storage for those cloudy days and so forth. So I'll limit the use of charging for battery storage overnight as off-peak is cheaper. So that's the point I was trying to say. Why would I cycle my battery for -4 cents? That doesn't make any sense. I'll save the battery up, I'll use it in 5 years' time when the off-peak, when the solar feed-in tariffs will be through the floor. So, but there is another school of thought. So if your goal is to minimise imported electricity, then your goal can be to basically reduce your grid imports. You're going to be cycling the battery more to do it that way because you're going to fill it up during the day and run it down and then fill it up. It's going to go deeper because you're actually using that battery to charge your own car. Again, different schools of thought, although batteries degrade over time too, so you could argue you should use it or lose it. So there's two reasons why batteries degrade. Just time. They just the same whether it be a storage battery or a car battery. As the vehicle gets older, or the home storage gets older, there's a degradation that happens, and when you cycle, there's also a degradation. My experience is that it's worse over time as opposed to cycling it. It depends a little bit on the chemistries, but generally age seems to have more impact. So you can look at some of the Tesla stats on EVs, and they've got cars that have done 300,000 or 400,000 miles. They're getting not very similar battery degradation on a car like that was doing that test loop from LA to Vegas. isn't much different from the car that was doing like 30% of those kilometres or 30% of those miles over the same once the car's 4 years old. The design of storage needs to address this choice, whether you're going to charge to minimise cost or charge to maximise solar consumption. It's your choice as customers what you want to do. So if you don't want to be importing anything from the grid, that's perfectly fine, nothing wrong with that viewpoint, and that's what you need to tell someone when you're sizing your solar and storage system. If you just want to keep the cost down as low as possible, then you're like, okay, well, I'll get away with a smaller storage system and I'll just charge using off-peak. So I just use that solar system to cover me, say, for example, to 10 o'clock at night. After that, I can get electricity that's cheaper. So this is a slide, this is from Solar Analytics. Anyone's got Solar Analytics as a monitoring product? One, no one, just me. One? One. Tom's got it. So this is just a slide which basically says the yellow is the solar generation and the purple over the top is my consumption. And if you're looking at the slide intently enough, you realise that we did pretty well. So we pretty much soaked up all the solar that was being generated, and that was mostly through charging 2 EVs. But of course, you can't have an EV at home all the time. You need to go out for lunch. And sure enough, there's an hour and a half there. We went out to lunch and the car wasn't there to charge. So that's still pretty good. So we have a scenario where we generated 34 kilowatt hours of solar during the day and we used 30 kilowatt hours to power our cars and run air conditioning, other stuff we need to do for the day, and not a drop came out of the grid. Well, very, very small amounts came out. So yeah, it's certainly, storage can be a very good thing if you're aiming for you're minimising your grid imports. Something I get asked quite often is, what's happened with Vehicle-to-Grid? Have you guys done presentations on Vehicle-to-Grid at Renew in recent times? Okay. We get asked this all the time when we go to EV festivals. Can I power the house from my EV? So technically, yes, you can. So my Nissan Leaf, for example, and other cars that have a CHAdeMO socket on, which is a DC socket, they do support bi-directional charging, and the Outlander PHEV also supports it. I think they're the only two in the country that support bi-directional charging, which means that given the right box, you could do that. You could actually use your car and plug it in and help out the house. However,
cars that have DC have that option?
no, it's only supported with cars that have CHAdeMO, and then it depends on the car. But so CCS2, which is the DC fast charging that comes in your car, and the Ioniq, doesn't support bi-directional charging at the moment. However, I have seen a YouTube video of a car in Singapore, 2 Ioniqs actually, where they plug in 2 CCS cables together, and that car was able to charge up the Ioniq, which had run flat. So officially no, but I think potentially yes, but I suspect you'd have to be modifying at least that service vehicle to be able to push the power out. But CHAdeMO, so CCS2 bidirectional charging is coming. It's in a future release, but they've probably found a way to say, hey, the car's going to let it happen. It's given the right communications and it's been able to work. So $10,000 for a bidirectional charger and integrating into your home, so it's a significant cost. There's no approved products in Australia that I know of. I think Setec have a charger which is $7,000 or $8,000 for a 5-6 kilowatt bidirectional charger. Obviously, when you're doing this, you're reducing your EV's range, and we come from our background where EV range is really important when you've only got 100 and 150 kilometres of it. It's different now. It hasn't really taken off because people weren't willing to do that. And funnily enough, the 2 vehicles that offer bidirectional charging are 2 of the shortest range EVs you can buy, i.e. the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV. So it's ironic that Nissan got on board with the whole idea of bidirectional charging, certainly from Japan and, all the challenges they have over there, with tsunamis and so forth. It makes sense, but not really for us. There's warranty concerns around it, potentially cycling the battery additionally. That's why generally most manufacturers aren't interested in offering this. So Tesla and others just not interested. Go buy my Powerwall. And of course, it only works when your home is, when your vehicle's at home and it's sufficiently charged. So grid and standalone would probably be both cheaper at the moment to go down that sort of path. So my point here is that vehicle to home has potential, but there's really been little to no progress in this area since 2010 when EVs hit the market. So maybe let's see in 2025. I think the concept's good, but I think we need larger size batteries to make it work, and someone needs to actually build the integration so it makes it easy to plug in at home and do it. We don't have that at the moment. It's not products you can buy here or other than Japan. There's really not much else out there.